Hi there. We are going to start a new little series in which I explain fandom history for those that are new for fandom, those that have been in fandom for a long time and just don't know our history very well, and for those that are just curious about a side of history that is never really talked about because it is, well, cringy. Fandom has been around for a very, 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 very long time and has basically always been something that women have done, something that has been an outlet for neurodivergent people, and has just been a way for people to express creativity in non-traditional ways. So whenever you think of fandom, especially today, you're probably thinking of major shows and cartoons and book series that exist right now, like Harry Potter, Stranger Things, uh, Pokemon, anything like that that you can think of for a fandom. But the very first fandom, at least as far as modern definitions goes, was actually Sherlock Holmes. So whenever you think of Sherlock Holmes today, you might be thinking of the Robert Downey Jr. movies, or more than likely, you're thinking of BBC Sherlock and Super Wholock as a whole, as a fandom. If you don't know what Super Wholock is, or I guess was, it's not really in existence anymore, it was a fandom back in about 2014 at the height of its popularity that consisted of the shows Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock, BBC Sherlock to be specific. And those three fandoms absolutely took over Tumblr. They were everywhere, everybody loved them. You know, you had a reaction gif for everything whenever it came to Supernatural, and then you would have people acting like detectives to be like Sherlock, and you would have people just crying over Rose Tyler for Doctor Who. But Sherlock has been a lot more popular than that for years and years and years before this was even a thought. It was even before the last century that people have been obsessed with Sherlock. So back whenever Sherlock was being written, it was published as short stories in a magazine called The Strand. So it was published in there by the author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he had massive success with this series. It brought thousands and thousands of subscribers to The Strand just by itself. People would be writing in fan mail towards Sherlock, addressing Sherlock specifically, and they would even address this mail to 221B Baker Street, which is not a real address. The Baker Street didn't even go up to 221, so that caused issues with the postal service in London because they didn't know where to deliver this mail. But it all eventually, at least for the most part, found its way to Doyle, and the man did not really care for it very much. He was not as big of a fan of his own work as you would think, considering how much popularity this series had. He did not care for Sherlock as a character. He wanted to work on other things, he wanted to create other stories, but everyone only wanted more Sherlock. So he did what any self-respecting author would when faced with a character that he couldn't do anything else with besides just continue writing these stories he didn't want. He killed Sherlock. He killed Sherlock off. We all know about that kind of story, and they even did it in BBC Sherlock. They killed him off and then brought him back. Well, they wouldn't have been able to bring him back had the fandom for Sherlock not existed back then. Because of the fandom, people got up in arms about the fact that Doyle killed off Sherlock. They held public mournings, they all wore black bands around their arms to show their grief. They wrote into Doyle expressing their anger in not so nice ways. And they even unsubscribed by the thousands from the Strand, from the magazine that Sherlock was being published in. As you can imagine, all of this backlash did not go over very well. and Doyle ended up having to basically rescind Sherlock's death and bring him back. He hated that. He didn't want to do it, but he did it anyway, and he continued writing him for a little while longer until he just basically said, done, done, done. But where Doyle failed to enjoy writing for Sherlock, fans sure picked it up and loved it. So people started writing their own fic for Sherlock, thus creating fanfiction as we know it now. They would write different kinds of AUs. They would write just their own adventures of Sherlock, so they would be like canon compliant fic that we know today. And they even created John Locke as a ship, creating, Sherlock shipped with John Watson. That was all created way back then. They even created the term canon. So the way that they would express the difference between all of these alternate universes they were creating, where Sherlock and Watson were, real people telling Doyle to write these stories or something like that, they would be like, that is not canon. That is not what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. That is our creation. And they would do this constantly. And it's so cool to see just how similar Sherlock was back then as it is today, even down to the mourning. My God, I can imagine us doing that today. Holding a public mourning, holding like a candlelight vigil somewhere. I could see us doing that. I could see that happening. The only problem is considering the time period, they very well may have thought that Sherlock was an actual person, and that's why a lot of people mourned. But more than likely, the majority of them knew that he wasn't actually a real person, and they were instead just very mad that Doyle killed off their favorite character. But the possibility is there, considering that this was around the first time that you were really seeing like celebrity culture emerging in, the public view. People were really starting to enjoy that kind of thing and have those kinds of interactions with popular media. Popular media was becoming a thing back whenever these were being written. So, yeah. That is the story of the very first fandom, and trust me, Sherlock gets bigger and bigger from there. We have conventions as we know them today because of Sherlock. Sherlock really is the very first fandom to establish modern fandom as it works. They created so much of how fandom subculture is, and they did this before even the turn of the 20th century. Which is very, very cool. Very impressive. I love seeing that kind of history. And of course, Sherlock is not the only fandom out there that helped establish how it works today. You also have things like Star Trek. You have X-Files. So many different fandoms from back in the 90s that would help establish how things go today. So if you want to learn more about that kind of history and you want to learn where our roots came from as far as all of fandom, let me know down in the comments. I am more than happy to be the fandom historian here and explain how all of this works to everyone that I see. I can even explain the history of shipping as a concept if people want, because that's fun. That involves X-Files. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!